Rabbi Susan, is that your background or is that pretend?
That's real. I'm in
Oh,
my
wow.
my home office, so I have
Okay.
a nice,
Wow,
like
nice
my
weather.
sanctuary,
Yeah, I can understand that completely.
and it's the quietest room in the house usually,
Yeah.
except that it's right near the front door. So when the dog sees anybody walking back and forth, which especially on a beautiful day like today, it's constant. Everybody's out.
Everyone is down. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everyone's walking constantly now.
Okay. But thank you, Yusuf, for coming on. Oh, we're on Facebook Live now. Okay. Good afternoon, salaam alaikum, shalom, and welcome to the Sister Act podcast. I'm Hurnasa Faryad. I'm the founder and one of the co-hosts of the Sister Act podcast, which is a project of the American Muslim Institution. Today, I have my co-host, Rabbi Susan Shankman, with me here today, whom I really enjoy having conversations with. And also today we have a special guest, Yusuf Faryar, who is going to talk about a very important topic that I think within our communities has been stigmatized or even relegated to a point where we don't really appreciate the amount of sacrifice and input that our mothers have done for us in our lives, especially those mothers who came to this country as immigrants. So I'm going to introduce Yusuf Faryar. He is the owner of FitLab, the fitness laboratory, a personal training company based in Northern Virginia. He is a certified personal trainer and has been in the fitness and wellness industry for over 14 years. He was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and came to the USA at the age of 4. He currently resides in Fairfax County, Virginia, with his 2 sons. Welcome to the show, Yusuf.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Happy second day of Eid to everyone. Happy Memorial Day weekend. So it's a lot of celebration everywhere and a beautiful sunny day. So thank you again for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Yusuf, we're so happy that you're here with us today and to share your personal story and certainly to share about the impact your mother in particular has had on your life. And so we thought we could start by having you walk us through who your mom was in her youth in Afghanistan, what she liked to do, her interests, and what she did in Afghanistan prior to getting married.
I'd love to do that. She lived at a time when Afghanistan was a real Afghanistan, is what I want to say. That's when there was no Taliban, there was no political craziness, I want to say. She went to school with her friends, wore mini skirts, was very forward, wore jeans, listened to Western music. Elvis was a big deal. Tom Jones was a big deal. That's the time that she lived in. She went to the movies, had ice cream, everything that we would do here in the United States. At that time, I want to say like in the 70s. Before we came to America, she was a math teacher in Afghanistan. And that's where she basically grew up. She hadn't gone outside of Afghanistan. She is one of 3 sisters. Mom became a widow at the age, I want to say, when she was actually 15 years old. So she's grown up, I want to say, without a dad since 15 years of age. And she completed her education in Afghanistan all the way through, went back to teach math, because I think there was like almost like a difference of women there in Afghanistan that were pre-married and also like post. So she, if I'm not mistaken, would teach the women that were post-married. So it's like almost like a continuing education type for Afghanistan and the women there.
So, and then you left Afghanistan for Pakistan due to the war. What was your mother's reaction to that, to leaving her home and family and the life that she knew?
It was a very big deal for our family because we came from I don't want to say a royal family, but we came from a higher, or we'll just say royal family. And so their life would have been in danger if they had stayed. If my mom had stayed in Afghanistan, I would not have seen America. I would most likely not be alive. So it was either stay and be taken away during that time, or to seek refuge in Pakistan. But our thoughts were that, hey, you know what? After all this stuff is over from Pakistan, we're going to go back to Afghanistan. Afghanistan is our home, and everything is going to be fine and dandy, and life will continue. That was the idea. We went to Afghanistan, I want to say shortly after, when I was 1 year old. We went to Pakistan shortly after 1 year old, and my little brother was born in Islamabad. So we stayed there, I want to say, for a little bit over a year until we were able to come to America by sponsorship. And my grandma was able to sponsor us to the United States.
And once you came to the United States, you settled in Virginia. You all settled in Virginia. Your grandmother was here already, and you started kindergarten. And your mom had to find work. What was that like for her, especially or specifically as an immigrant? What was that experience?
Total shock, as culture shock, language barrier completely. They knew of English, and maybe they spoke a little bit of English as well, but not so much that, you know what, we're in America now, and so you're not able to speak really your own language. And so she was kind of forced to pick up a trade and to run with it, because it was me, my brother, and also my dad. And so she, being the daughter of a widow, she saw my grandmother, I think, as, hey, you know what? Girl power. My grandmother pushed them through Afghanistan. My grandpa died when my mom was super young, and my grandma, she had a lot of opportunity to get remarried, but she chose not to. So it wasn't an arranged marriage at all. She was able to get remarried, but she did not. She chose to take care of her 3 children and push forward. She built a house, which is kind of like unheard of almost in Afghanistan, by herself as a woman. She didn't do the manual labor, but she took care of that. She pretty much put all the girls through education completely, all in different ways. And so that's what I've seen. And so here in America, that's exactly what my mom has picked up. She said, you know what? She didn't speak the language at all. Maybe she spoke a little bit, but she was a foreigner. And so one of my mom's good cousins, her name is Seema, she had taught my mom how to sew and do all these things. And so she said, you know what, come to me, I'm going to teach you how to sew, and we could make something of this. And my mom, being a math teacher, totally new, didn't know anything. She said, okay, I've got to push forward. I've got to make it happen here. And so that's what she did. She started to actually bring home bows, like a bow tie. She would sew them at home, and then she would take them back to the facility or the place that they were like almost due. Almost like we could even think of like today's day, like to make a mask for everyone, and then she would submit it to somewhere for maybe like $1 a bow or 50 cents a bow or whatever like the compensation was at that time, just to make some type of ends meet. Even then, it didn't make ends meet. At that time, my uncle, who was my aunt's husband, he had come to America. He was paying like a portion of like the rent that we're able to do. So say if the rent was like $800 at that time, he would pay half of it and she would pay the other half. Slowly, my mom picked up and was like, okay, then she got my dad into this. So as far as like, she has been the daughter of like a matriarch. She has led our family. So I come from a very matriarchal family, happily. And so she's led our family through it completely, starting from this little trade of doing this sewing of the bows. She later joined Nordstrom, the big chain of Nordstrom. She opened Tyson's Corner Mall Nordstrom. She opened Dulles Town Center Nordstrom. She's Nordstrom company for almost rounded up to 30 years. In that time, she brought my dad on. And said, hey, this is going to be good. I'm going to teach you how to do these things, because my dad was actually a French teacher, had left Afghanistan, had his education in France, and then come back to America, had come back to Afghanistan. That's when he had married my mom and those things. And so she's the one that said, hey, this is a great idea. You need to do this. And so basically my mom has always been like in the managerial position, a very higher position, and she brought him onto it. And that's where the story is. So she's led everything in that way.
Yusuf, it's interesting how you mentioned your mom doing the bow ties. So when we came to the United States in Queens, New York, we were all inundated with making the belts. I don't know if you ever saw those belts coming in, but
Wow. Okay.
yeah, we were
That's,
actually given belts to, like, we would bring belts home, and the stuff like my sister could do at home, because they weren't going to school. So I would sit there and help her put those belts together. I still remember them vividly. They were mostly suspenders. I think they were
mhm.
suspenders and not even belts. Yeah, they were suspenders. And it was interesting how you just said that, and I was just like, wait a minute, we used to kind of do something of the same sort. And it's funny how the immigrant life is so connected in one way or another. Regardless of how you come here, you always are trying to make ends meet and trying to take care of your family. But to see your mother as a woman, as an Afghan, and as a fellow Afghan, I know there's so many things that are connected to our culture and our background that we need to change, especially in light of how we perceive women and the rights of women. But to see your mom come here in the early 80s and literally pick up and take the responsibility without really knowing the language, without really understanding the culture, I give her a lot of props. But I think also connecting her to your grandma, and your grandmother being such a pivotal person in your life and in your mother's life, I want you to kind of walk us through what that was like, because you have this grandmother who is a great role model for your mother, right? How did that work its way through in terms of the resiliency that your mom actually picked up, from seeing your grandmother?
Just like that, I think my mom has become almost like my grandmother's like mirror. Even though there are three daughters and those three daughters make up my grandma, I think my mom has taken the bigger part of the mirror and like held on to that flag. And she has become like a big leader, just like the way my grandmother was. My grandmother in her own way also was very a leader, was also very feminine as well. She was the one that actually taught my little brother and I how to pray, how to do all the like the Islamic things that really like a parent would teach. At that time, my mom was not able to do that because she was working. She was working. We always say, oh, it's the job of the parent to be teaching the kids or their kids to how to pray and the Islamic things and the Muslim things, and this is how they work. But my mom wasn't able to do that for us because she was working to basically put food on the table for us. Every summer, we would actually go to my grandma's house. She would drop us off to my grandmother's house and she would teach us how to pray. And I hate to say it, almost took like 7 years for us. We were very young and it's like, what happened there? But one day it clicked and I loved it. And actually every time that I make dua as I pray, I thank her first because she's the one that taught us how to pray. And I say, thank God for my grandmother and I hope she is in heaven. May God accept her fasting and her prayers, and may God forgive her for all of her sins. And I wish she was here with us. But that's the kind of woman that my grandmother was. She was the queen of our life. And so my mom, almost like as the princess, she took on that flag and very happily and almost like naturally is what she did. So that's something that I've been like super duper proud of in that way. And so she's just picked up just like that in my grandmother's footsteps, pushed forward with her family, no matter what the cost was and really no matter what the sacrifice was.
So Yusuf, as a child, you saw your mother juggling many things, even though your father was in the picture, but your mother pretty much handled life for you and your brother. You talked a little bit about that matriarchal family and how important and special that was. How did this affect your perception of women, the strength your mother showed you through her sacrifice?
This was all like, I want to say maybe like a juxtaposition, if I'm using that word correctly. It's very funky because my mom is a woman and Islam, it's so male focused that the man of the house and, the man is the head of the house and all these things and men go forward and all these things. But in my world, ever since I've known, the woman has gone forward and very strong, very happily, very confidently. And that's how I've grown up. So, how really almost like, how the bills came, my mom's the one that took care of the bills. The money would come to her, she would pay the bills. She knows exactly what's coming in and what's going out. And the contribution that my dad made, my mom was okay. She didn't really push that hard because she knew that, hey, maybe this guy can do it or this man can't do it or whatever the case was. She kept pushing forward with my little brother and I. And that was pretty much it in that way. So it's very maybe like ironic or in a funny way, but she was total matriarch, and I understand why. But that made me also appreciate women so much more. And I said, you know what? And it's very funny that, you know, when people say when you do get married, you marry someone that's just like your mom. And it's funny, the connection that my ex-wife and my mom had are very close, because they're very close in personality as well. Very forward, very strong personalities. But I said, you know what? I'm not going to let this happen. I don't want her to lead. I want to be an equal. I want to be an equal. I want to do my part. I want to do more than my part. If I'm going to be a dad, I want to be even better dad than what I saw with my own eyes and what I felt with my own heart. So that's how I've grown up.
Yusuf, you talk about your mom's sacrifice, and you know, I'm sure if we sit back and think about all the times we've interacted with our parents and the things they've said and the things they've done, we could come out with a plethora of examples of how that sacrifice actually manifested in our daily, you know, just life, like an incident happening. Or you had mentioned that, you know, sometimes, you know, you had to get picked up from school, but because she was running late from work, she was running around trying to pick you guys up, but you know, you knew that she had to be at work. Like those types of things are things that people don't express. And especially within our communities, we try to hide a lot of our problems. We try to hide a lot of the things that we're going through, only because I think it comes with the territory, because our community really doesn't understand what to do with that information. Our community does not know how to maneuver around that, right? But for your mom coming here at that time and going through what she was going through in the early 80s is a bit unheard of, because majority of the women who came to the United States at that time, at her age, did not venture out to go into work, did not become the, you know, primary breadwinner in the family. They, you know, pretty much stayed home and kind of went through the daily rituals of providing with things at home. Can you give us an example of an incident where you know, you might have been having a conversation with your mom, or you saw your mom, you know, go through this, and as a, you know, child, you were able to see that she was doing something above and beyond an ordinary task that was, you know, expected from a woman?
She, just like how you explained, like, you know, someone would be the breadwinner and also be the mom as well. She did both of those. So as growing up, I had more of a feeling that, you know, my mom is playing both roles. She is being my dad and my mom at the same time. I remember one of the stories that she dropped us off at daycare, and this daycare was at a church. It was not like an Islamic church or Muslim church at all. It was just maybe even a Christian daycare, because that's the only way that, you know, she was able to afford that time. So she was able to go to school. And always like at daycares, there's that cutoff time at maybe 6 o'clock or 6:30, but she was actually right on that line, coming from work. And she's like, oh my gosh, I've got to hurry, because they're going to close. And just how I've experienced also kind of crunching the time too. That's, oh, I need to get there. And what happened is that we were the last kids to be picked up at that time. The lights were off. The teachers were there sitting with us outside. This was at a church, actually. And so they were sitting outside of the church with me and my little brother. At that time, my mom was running us, you know, driving as fast as she could from one place to another to pick us up. She picked us up, still keeping her mom hat on, as I say, came home, still made food for us, still had to make dinner for us. And that's how really our day went. She dropped us off, she went to work, picked us up. We were at daycare. She came back, still kept her mom hat on. She still kept her work hat on, because many of the times when we would go to sleep, she would still work. She would still have work that she would bring home from a tailor job that she had also in Springfield Mall. At that time, Springfield Mall in Virginia was the hustle and bustle. And it was a huge like tailor shop there for men's suits. And she would bring those suits home just so she wasn't behind. And so when we would go to sleep, she would not even really clock out, as we say. She would still be clocked in and she would still be working. And that day in and day out, seeing that is just so amazing. Maybe at that time I didn't understand it, but now it almost doesn't make sense. Like, how does somebody do something like that? But she pushed through. So.
And Oh, Ernesta's going to say something, but I know as a full-time working mom that there have been those moments and pushing through. I mean, I can't assume for your mother, but I know that there's a piece of all of this that is in the doing for our children. That is what helps us get through those moments. That's what gives the strength to continue and to move forward and to take on those extra tasks. And that there's something deeper. And listening to this, I think, and again, not to be presumptuous, so I'm going to ask you to speak about it, but we can conclude that your mom has a close spiritual relationship and connection to her creator, both in her words and in her actions. And we say certain things are written by God. How did that statement guide her through her life and her sacrifices here in the U.S.?
That's exactly it. So you're presuming totally correct. She has grown up totally Muslim. She doesn't drink alcohol. She prays during the time of fasting 5 times a day as best as she can. Even behind that, even though she may not be at the level of maybe wearing a scarf, but she is super humble in that way. And just like God being at the forefront, and there's a saying in Farsi that we say is Khuda mirabon ast, and that really means that God is generous. And so almost I would just look at her and be like, how is this happening? She's like, no, God is generous. God is generous. God is generous. That's like one of the number one things that I can remember, and that I've taken on, saying like, no, God is generous, and he is generous, and it's basically everything is going to be okay. And really, it was funny because I was just explaining to my own boys this morning that this world that we live in is really because of my mom's sacrifices and all of her hard work. We own our own townhouse here in Annandale, Virginia. And I say, hey, you know what, all these cool things that we have is because she's made those sacrifices for us. Even though, of course, my dad was there, but I was basically raised by a single parent that really played both roles. And so that's why I say, you know what, that should be held on such a different pedestal than a basically like a balanced mom and a dad situation, I guess. So that's where I am, I think. So it's huge for me.
Yeah, it's amazing how faith can actually play such a pivotal role in our life, especially when things are going so wrong or seems not going according to our own plan. Because, we plan, but, God says you plan, but I'm the best of planners. And so whatever I plan is going to happen in your life. And so actually keeping that account and being grateful for what we're going through is huge, because when you don't have that, I think that's when a lot of internal problems happen. That's a lot of times when we break down and we lose who we are. But it seems like your mom really kept that going, and the nurturing and the love and the education that your grandmother actually gave was so pivotal that your mom has embraced that and has passed it on to you and to your kids. So it's amazing to hear that. But I want to put you on the spot now, because I do that sometimes.
Okay.
So, I mean, as a single mom, I myself at times get really exhausted. And I think that's normal. And I like to say that because I don't want our lives to look as if like we have everything together, and that we don't go through fatigue and we don't go through isolation and we don't go through loneliness. And so sometimes, I get overwhelmed, and I get, sometimes you could say fed up, or like I need a break. So I get in the car and I go drive somewhere by myself, and I sit and I think about all the things that were going wrong, or all the things that could have gone differently. And, sometimes my kids might be able to feel that. Did you ever feel that with your mom growing up, where, if she was frustrated or was just too much, and it was becoming not a burden, because that's not what I want to use. It's not the word I want to use, because children aren't a burden, but the whole process of life at that point becomes overwhelming, and we have to kind of step back to process it. Did you ever feel that with your mom?
The crazy part is that I never felt that at all. She was very much like a superwoman that never showed her feelings in that way, to be like, wow, I'm so tired. I've never heard her say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, or let me just take 5 minutes, or let me go hide in the closet and eat like a candy bar or something. Nothing at all like that. And even till this day, because she actually helps me take care of my children too, my 2 boys, just like my little brother and I. But it's a whole different world now because they're my kids. So that's been very like heartwarming, I think, but also tough because she's not a superwoman. She does have feelings. She does get tired. And so that's where when I want to say almost became of age, that I was able to understand those and to sense those things. I wanted to make life as easy as possible for her. I want to say like an example is like I was never like a crazy kid, I want to say. Like I brought great grades at home. I tried to make the honor roll as best as possible. And I did in elementary school and in high school. I was in, advanced classes, and I did as best as I could just so I can take that burden of feeling like, oh my gosh, she's got to work so hard, so much harder for us to make this happen. I tried to make that as easy as possible for her. She wasn't able to like tutor me in science or tutor me in this. She was able to totally tutor me in math, but that was a whole different math and a different style and like processes that she would go through. And I still didn't understand her teaching, but I still kept moving forward. My math excelled and my English is shortly after that. And so, so that struggle I didn't see. So now I'm very sensitive to that in any type of way. If I feel like, oh, maybe there is a fatigue or maybe this, I want to mend it for her. I want to be that Band-Aid for her. I want to take care of that as best as I can. So.
Well, that's really great that you're able to see that, and especially as a son and as a man. And I emphasize that because within our Afghan culture, and sometimes even within Muslim cultures, those things are usually sidelined when we don't recognize the amount of work and sacrifice that the women in our lives actually put out. That, the fatigue is always going to be there, but they don't show it. That the problems are always going to be there, but they don't show it. So like I might show like myself, I might end up crying in front of my kids. That's something I do once in a while. It just happens. I can't help it, right? But like there are a lot of things they don't know about because I don't feel that as a parent, they need to be burdened with that because it's going to add another layer of complexity in their life, right? So for your mom to acknowledge that and to, plow through life like a truck, full speed ahead is amazing. I'm really impressed in terms of hearing her resiliency in doing what she had to do in a foreign country with English not being her first language, or her not actually working in the field that she has actually gotten an education for. And that brings me into language. And one of the struggles immigrants have is to manage through and living in a different country, and as well as having cultural shocks. But it didn't seem like your mom even allowed any of these things to limit her aspirations to give you and your brother a well-rounded upbringing and raise you two to be great men. Can you talk about some of the conversations or important phrases of life your mom would constantly repeat throughout life to you, so like it gets instilled? Because I had that growing up with my father, and I'm pretty sure you have some that you can share with us. That would be great.
Oh yeah, the big part was in coming to America is that we're still Afghan. We're just living in America. And that was the bigger part. And she said, you know what, when you're in school, you can speak English, but when you come home, we're going to speak Farsi. And I said, no, but what we want your English to get better. We want your English to get better. She said, no, my English is going to be fine in time, but you all are going to speak Farsi, and that's it. And so really there are many times very quiet at the dinner table that we just look at each other and it would be nothing. And then we just say something in English, and then she'd be like, okay, Farsi here. And slowly that's what we picked up. And so that's how my little brother and his daughter, she speaks great Farsi, and she's actually biracial. She speaks great Farsi. My sons speak, I want to say great Farsi also because of their mom and also me, but more so that instilling from my mom. So that was like a very big deal, I think, for us. But for her, I don't think the language was, maybe it was a barrier for a very short amount of time. But now I think being outside of Afghanistan for, I want to say almost like 40 years now, almost my whole life, she is an avid texter. She can text, maybe not so fast. She has an iPhone. She has Facebook. Her English is great. I always say, like, you have to be careful. Your English is getting very dangerously good. So that's reassuring that she never let that stop her. She still speaks Farsi and all those good things, but she just really put this on the burner as well to learn English. And I think she's mastered as best as somebody outside of Afghanistan can do after like 40 years. So it's kind of nice that way.
What about some phrases that she would constantly say around you guys growing up? you know, the important Afghan phrases that we all grow up with, or even some in English that are constantly repeated, you know. My father had a few, I can't remember them right now, but, you know, he would constantly say it to us as if like, if we didn't learn those phrases and pass it down to our children, it would have been like the end of the world.
Oh yeah.
Right.
These phrases also, like we call them like zarba masal. Basically, they're just like little, just like that phrases, I think. Let's see, some of the like the major ones, gosh, I want to say is like you basically, in Farsi, they say, "Tu mar parda ko ke khuda tu ra parda kana." So basically what that means, the translation is basically, you take care of me so God can take care of you. So say that, you know, something happens, maybe somebody is doing something wrong. We don't want to spread like hearsay or gossip about them. Cover them, you know, take care of them. Then God will take care of you. So basically not spreading like falsehood or rumors or gossip in that way. That was a very big one for us. Gosh, what else? There's so many that I can't think of, but I lived on them, because when I was growing up, I would sit with the adults and I would just listen to them talk and talk, because I was right in the middle of the age group. And so I couldn't really hang out with the adults, and I really couldn't hang out with the kids. And so just listen to them talk and talk. And I loved the lessons and those expressions that they would use. Like, gosh, I can't, there's so many. It's very ironic, because my wife at the time, she actually got me a book of them that someone had made. Actually, an English author had put it together. I want to say like a Colonel too. It's very popular. And he had put this together, and I loved it. It's one of my most treasured books I have in my own personal library as well. But it's super nice. And really, it's those phrases that translate so nicely in English that keep you going. They keep you going in that way. Just saying, you know, Khuda mi rabbana, so God is good. Just keep having faith, and almost like a positive reassurance was like the biggest deal, I think, for us.
Rabbi Susan, I'm pretty sure you can add a few of your own phrases growing up from your parents, because I don't think we can find any place on the earth where parents don't have things they want to instill in their kids, and they repeat phrases over and over again, right?
Yeah. So you're putting me on the spot, because of course I can't think of them in the, I grew up with, when I was very young, my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mother all speaking Yiddish to each other. But it was really, and my great-grandmother lived to be about 94, I think. I was about 6 or 7, almost 7, 6.5 when she died. But and I remember, I have images of going with her. She really didn't speak much, if any, English. I have images of going with her and listening to her speak in Yiddish. But my grandmother and my mother, throughout my grandmother's life as well, would use Yiddish as a way to talk about things that they didn't want the kids to understand. So then it was a lot of learning and relearning the language later on. And there are a lot of really great phrases that are, you know, in many ways common sense, and but also, you know, things, and I would butcher it if Yiddish now, is like, every pot has its lid. And, you know, that was when I remember with, you know, at times when I was brokenhearted over a boyfriend or something, you know, that there was always, there's someone out there, there's hope, whatever the situation. Many other phrases too that I, of course, can't think of right now. But yeah, I think that is, you know, across different cultures, there are those phrases that are connections. They're connections to a place that where we may not be right now, but it's still holding on to those cultural treasures that are so much a part of shaping who we are, and
right,
you know, the family as well.
Right. My dad actually did not allow us, like Yusuf, to speak English at home. And he would always say, well, I'm doing you a favor so that you can keep your mother tongue at home. But my siblings and I had a joke. We're like, no, he actually just wants us to speak Farsi at home so he could understand what we're saying. It wasn't about keeping the mother tongue going. He spoke it fluently. We're like, it's because he wants to know what we're saying. And he was so adamant about it. Like, if we even said one word, even though he knew what that one word meant, he's like, Farsi. English teacher got me. Like, why are you talking in English when you know inside the house you're only going to speak Farsi? But I actually am grateful that he did do that, because I can speak it fluently, even though, you know, I came here when I was so young and I grew up and I think in English. But to know your mother tongue and to be actually be able to have a conversation in it is, I think, such a rewarding a thing that we've been blessed with.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how language actually plays out for immigrant families when they come to another country.
And
Oh,
I
yeah.
would say to hold on to that too, because as Hernessa knows, I mean, my family, that my great grandmother was born in Russia, came to the United States as a teenager by herself, um, but my grandparents were all born in this country, and so it's, those three generations later, to not have that, to have to learn the language, to not have it be. I think it's so important to retain that and to keep, even though at times it feels like, as for children, I think it's that being caught between two worlds, but also opening up that world that that you want them to not just hold on to, but to really treasure and see as theirs, and to really own. I think that's so important. Um, so
That's
Yusuf,
also a big deal too. Yeah, like that reminds me also. Pardon me. My mom would always say, once you become a parent, you're gonna understand. Um, and just how you said that, and also speaking Farsi, like I always look at my kids and say, why don't you speak Farsi? We should speak more Farsi. But then I'm the one that's speaking English with them, just like Hernessa. I think in English. So I'm like, oh, we should speak more Farsi. And I think that their mom also speaks in English too, with a little bit of mix in Farsi as well. But I think predominantly we speak Farsi in the house, or try to as best as we can. But I think that's also a saying too. At that time, I didn't think twice. Oh gosh, we have to speak, Farsi here. But now I really appreciate it, and I have a different appreciation for it because I see it in my own kids too. Um, so that is one thing that you really highlighted on. So I brought that up for me.
Yeah, you actually have to come and listen to my girls try to understand Farsi, and
Mm.
it's the funniest thing because they don't speak either one of them fluently, have any idea what any of it means. So they will actually reenact a Hindi movie scene, because Hindi and Urdu are almost the same, and their father is from Pakistan. So they try to like speak some of that, and it's so wrong. Like it's so funny. They could actually come up with like a YouTube channel just on their interpretation of how to speak Urdu, and then Farsi is another one. And when you hear them talk, it's so funny. Like my sister cracks up when they try to speak Farsi because they have no clue what they're saying. But again, it's this idea of making that lineage passed down to your kids, but it's a really hard lineage to pass
Yeah.
when your predominant language is another one. For my dad, it was Farsi, so we all had to speak Farsi. Even when I go visit my siblings, they all speak Farsi, and I'm forced to speak Farsi with them because that's what everyone converses in. But living in the United States, being of an immigrant family, trying to preserve that, it takes a lot of work. So I'm not really hard on people when they say, oh, my children don't speak my mother tongue, whatever, because we're in a different environment. So the fact that they could even say that they understand two words, I'm still proud of them.
well, I feel a little bit better.
There you go.
And even, and I think that having it and speaking it at home, and that connection to family is so important, because it does make it less of a, I don't want to call it a burden, but I know that for my children, going to Hebrew school in order to learn Hebrew, and we should, when we started out, when our first was born, we had always said when we would speak Hebrew at home, well, we said one of us would speak English and one would speak Hebrew, and I was the elected Hebrew speaker. It didn't work because we weren't both speaking,
Yeah.
it sort of dropped off. It made it challenging, but I think that is, it's a gift more than anything. It's a link and a connection to family and heritage, which is really special. So Yusuf, I know you've talked about all that your mother has done in raising you, and in being a role model in so many ways. Can you tell us any huge thing that your mother sacrificed for you and your brother, for which you'll always be grateful?
I think it's both like a double-edged sword in that way. I think she really sacrificed love in that way. Love, I think, from a partner, and love as in knowing like how good it feels for someone to have your back in that way, like a true partnership, because she, I feel like, has been alone for 40 years. She has fought this battle from Afghanistan to now. I'm almost 40 years old. I'm 39 years old. She, I feel like, has been battling for 40 years by herself. And I think just to take off that, we've been talking about the word burden, just to take off a little bit for her, I think would be a really nice thing. And it's sad that that's the sacrifice that she made of her own personal love, to understand that, hey, you know what, someone has your back and someone loves you enough to say, hey, you know what, I got this one. You know what, I'm going to take care of this one. Or I see you working so hard. How can I make your life easier? And that's kind of the sad sacrifice that she has made. But I think now that I've come of age, and that she's also in a physically and emotionally and a mentally different place, I have been a huge proponent of that, for her to find that. And so I've said, you know what, I'm going to create a Facebook for you. And she's like, what's that? What's Facebook about? I said, look, I'm going to put some really nice pictures of you on there. We're going to do all these things. And we got her an iPhone. My little brother and we got her an iPhone. I think it's the easiest way to do it. And I said, here, you take care of this. Don't accept all of your friend requests. Please ask me what's happening here, and we'll figure it out. And I think that's been such maybe a heartwarming avenue, I think, for her. And so she's able to open up, I think, as far as like communication, because of course, like, I think in our culture, it's so almost like taboo to talk about our feelings. But I message her all the time, hey, I love you. I can't wait for this to happen. I can't wait for this to happen. And she says it back, which is 40 years ago, that would not even existed, or maybe 20 years ago, certainly that didn't exist. So I hate to say that love was a sacrifice that she made, but just like she says, Khuda mera bonasta, God is generous. She is still on this earth, and I'm so thankful for that. So I'm going to take on that flag of finding her happiness, because she's made that incredible sacrifice for me and my little brother. So that's been kind of the sad sacrifice. It's her own personal love, I feel.
And in order to help you with that, we'll help you take applications on this podcast.
Yeah, I need that.
Anybody who
I
has
need
potential, we can help you get some people on the list.
I would love that. And that's the culture shock of it. I'm like, hey, you need to do this. It's going to be so good. Oh, no, it's so tough. What can I do? I said, no, we're in a different world now. We cannot worry about these things. You have sacrificed for 40 years. You cannot sacrifice for another 40 years. It doesn't make sense. And I can't stand here and let you do that. It's not fair. It's not cool. And I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, because that is such a big stigma within a lot of women in a lot of different faith cultures as well, is that once, if you're married and the marriage doesn't work, or it ends, or you're a widow, your life is over. Basically, you aren't supposed to find love, or you're not supposed to even talk to another guy, or you're just supposed to just stay home and take care of your kids. And the fact that you can say that openly as a man, and someone who understands the importance of relationship and having a companion for your mom, speaks volume. And that's what our show is really here to do, is to take away the stigma and talk about issues that normal people don't want to talk about, and people just hide under the rug as if people don't have they don't have needs. So I want to thank you so much for actually bringing that out and saying that, because it's important for our audience to hear that.
Of course. Okay. I think women deserve more love, I think, than anything. And I think, sadly, she has taught me that. So anybody that really comes into my life, I think I want to put them on that pedestal. Happily, because that's how I've been brought up. Sadly, my mom she's basically, we've been brought up almost as girls, because that's all my mom knew how to do. So we weren't outside running around all the time. I can throw a party and I can take care of my guests, and I can do these things that generally, I guess, that a woman would do. But I'm thankful for that, and it's all good. And that she did the best that she could with what she had, and I say, Alhamdulillah, which really means thank God for all of it. And I wouldn't change it whatsoever.
I think we can also get your mom to kind of coach some mothers on how to raise their sons as well, because that's great. That's like an added benefit of growing up and knowing how to do things that are, normally culturally not connected to being a man, right?
Yeah.
So, but like, you can do that. So, there might be women and ending up sending her Facebook requests to see what she actually
Super nice.
Right? Inshallah.
A fun additive. That's very nice.
Okay, so I mean, like we're learning so much about your mom and how strong she is and how giving she is. But I really want to get down and learn more about who she is as a person in terms of like her hobbies. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and you can just answer them.
Of course.
So does she tell jokes?
She does tell jokes. She tells actually very like rated R jokes, which is very funny, I think, as an adult. So it's very like not rated R, but just like funny, corny jokes.
Okay, that's cool. Does she like to go to the movies or does she just like to be alone and read books?
She loves to go to the movies. Her favorite actress is Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. So anytime like the movie like that comes out with either of them, I say, hey, we're gonna go to the movies, and there's no saying no. She doesn't. Just, okay, great. What time are we gonna go? She'll be dressed and ready. So it's kind of nice that way.
Cool. Is she outgoing or shy?
No, very outgoing.
Okay, so she'll talk to even strangers.
Easily.
Okay, that's cool. What's her favorite type of music?
Her favorite is very like old school, I think Afghan. She loves Ahmad Wali, who's almost like almost not a classic singer, but almost like a, gosh, I don't know who to compare him to, but he's like a from Afghanistan as well, and he also sings here in America too. So I think he's like a nice like memory, I guess, of the past and of the present, and also like the future.
Yeah, I think with music, what you grew up with kind of sticks with you forever. It doesn't matter how old you get and what kind of new music ends up coming, because it just becomes so nostalgic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure all of us, including the rabbi, can say that we've grown up with music from our childhood that has actually been with us now. Like I play some of my music to my kids and they're like, oh my God, what is that? Please turn it on. Like, no, I'm like, you're going to have the same problem when you have kids. So just listen to it. You will appreciate it one day. Susan, is that something that you can say and agree with me on?
And definitely, I think there's certain music that that I have recollections of car trips listening to, as a kid in the 70s, Peter, Paul and Mary, the Beach Boys, John Denver. I'm trying to think of what else I think Barry Manilow on 8-track cassettes. I remember those. And certainly the music that I grew up in the 80s. And, it was interesting this year. One of my children for a music class, she actually had to she started asking me to listen to music that I liked rather than the music they want to listen to in the car. Like we'll get in the car and they'll say, oh, let me put on this, and half the time I don't, know what the music is, or I may not particularly like the music, but this time it was for weeks she was asking if she could listen to my music. And then we went to a concert at school, and the teacher talked about how he had told the kids he wanted them to get familiar with their parents' music and listen to the music that, really made them who they were. So then I understood that she enjoyed it. She started saying, I really like your music, Mom, but then I understood it initially, at least it was an assignment. But still, I think that there's more interest now from all my kids as they're getting older. My son is, my middle one is 16, and he said, I think I want to start collecting vinyl. And my dad said to me, my parents have an old turntable, and my dad said, I think I was about the same age when I started getting interested in like music in that way. I mean, my son's already interested in music, but he was more excited about the fact that the turntable my parents have is from like the 60s or early 70s. And it's going to be a project, not just, buying, records off the internet. But I think certainly that music tells a lot about an era in time. If my kids know that Bruce Springsteen and the Police and Billy Joel and U2, that those were some of my go-to bands and music. And now it's sort of, it's retro, but it's got a connection for them too. Just interesting.
So I remember the first time I played Jump Around by House of Pain for my girls, and they were like, oh my God, like literally in the car, they were covering their face and they were like, lower this. What is this? Because they just could not get it. I'm like, this is like one of the best songs. And I was just like, singing along with the lyrics, and they were like, no. It was complete embarrassment, but still, we have to do our part as parents to embarrass our children.
And sometimes they're surprised at how much that where there's a crossover, like there's some, whether it's older rap or hip hop or things that I know that, it'll come on and I know the song and I'm in reciting all the words and my kids look at me like, who are you and where did you come from? How do you know this?
Yeah,
God from my day.
God forbid. Yusuf, so I have one more question about your mom before I go over to Rabbi Susan. What are some of your mom's pet peeves, like things that just really irk her or she just can't handle?
I think number one things I think are like ill-mannered, because she, I think, is like growing up in such like a very like high etiquette of like, we should stand up when somebody comes into the room. We should say hi to them. So I think that's like manners, and saying hi and bye and just like using your best voice. And I think manners are a huge, huge thing for her. And I think coming from where we're from, I think she holds it on a different level too. So it's kind of nice because my little brother and I, we've grown up that way. So I really appreciate that too. So I totally get the pet peeve of the manners.
So, and now your mother's a grandmother and your sons interact with her as an extension of you, and probably manners probably is present in that relationship too. What are some of the similarities, some of the differences in her interactions with your sons compared to that with you and your brother? Sorry, there's a fire truck driving by.
That's okay.
Do you share your mother's lived experience with your sons?
Oh, totally. Almost like just like you said, extension. There's very few things that I disagree with her, and so there's not a lot of like, there's not a lot of pushback, as I say. Like when we set up like the dinner table, we have like a huge bar, and so we all sit around the huge bar because it's big enough to hold all of us. And so the fork goes on the left, the spoon goes on the right, and we eat here, and we use a napkin to wipe our mouths and not with our sleeves, and we say please and we say thank you, and that's been a huge thing because I know that little part is gonna be obviously a huge deal for them, whether 20 years old, 30 years old, and just like in the future. And I just feel like, that's most likely what she had taught us, or if not, my grandmother taught us. And so that's been a huge thing, I think, for me, just like the etiquette of just like being a basic gentleman for the boys, for me, has been like a huge wow factor, I think. So it's nice to have like that backup support, because I say it, of course, but then when my mom says it, the boys 100% listen. So that reinforcement, that's what it's nice. We reinforce each other. So
there must be a lot of really cute cuddling time between grandma and your sons.
Oh, completely. It's such sweet words, like wow. And I said, you know what, I see it and I'm just like, wow, heart eyes. Why, basically I look at them like, did I get that when I was younger? And sometimes my mom says, you know what, I can't, I love you and I think you're great, but these sons are amazing. They're like, wow. And I think, wow, could I love somebody more? And I think I can. And that's the wow factor, I think, of a grandma, that she's able to do that. And I love it. I'm not going to hold back, show them the love. So.
Well, Yusuf, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your beautiful story about your mom and all the things she had to go through and the sacrifice. I don't think you understand the scope of this conversation and how many people it will touch in terms of talking about a topic that is so hush-hush, and actually, sending a shout out to your mom and talking about your mom and talking about her struggles, because you're actually telling a story that is a story of a lot of people's mother's story. Where people who have struggled coming to this country, or even any other country where they've immigrated to, that the struggle is there, and you talking about your mom and the sacrifices that she had to go through and the love that she put on the table and the hard work that she did, that now she's self-sufficient, she has her own place, she has her own job, she's a manager. I mean, who would have thought, right? Like if you think about the holistic perspective of the story, you wouldn't actually get to see that from a lot of people, but your mother persevered. And these are the stories we want to share. We want to show that women are resilient, that they can do whatever they want, that they don't need immigration to limit them. They don't need language to limit them. And your mother is a huge example of that. So I want to first off, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your beautiful story and letting us get to know your mom. And even though we haven't met her, I feel like, you know, we know her through the story, and praying for her and you and your sons and your family. I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Susan for her comments, and then we'll end it with you doing that closing remarks, if that's okay with you.
You got it. Of course, it's okay.
Thank you.
Yusuf, I just want to thank you as well for sharing your relationship with your mother, and you know, I think for many of us, we wonder how much our children see and are aware of. I think that's true for mothers and fathers, but certainly for mothers, of so much of the behind the scenes, the late nights, the additional putting in whatever time and energy, and sometimes also letting go and letting somebody else take on some of the important aspects of raising and teaching, in order to make sure it happens, as you spoke about with your grandmother. But to be able to recognize that all of that came through, and your mother's goals for who you would be, how you would be raised, and also that letting go to allow others to take part of that as well. It's really, really special. I know, you know, certainly for me personally, but I know for our listeners too, to hear through your voice, to understand and recognize that it is seen and that it is appreciated. And as you said, you know, now being a parent yourself and seeing what your sons have taken, and recognizing that some of that is from your mother, but some of that is from your mother through you and through who you are, and what you've given to them too. And that we have a phrase in Judaism, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And the idea that it is on the shoulders of those who came before us, but also the important responsibility to transmit the tradition and to share it, even in places and ways that are that can be challenging because they're new or foreign, and then to find ways to make them our own, and to recognize that that those traditions live and thrive where you are, and that this is home, and that you still retain that connection. And it's such a gift, and to be able to share that with your mother, and to share that with your sons, what a gift for you. And thank you for being that gift and that blessing for us today, and sharing your story.
Wow. Thank you very much, really. I don't know the scope of it, and how hopefully not my story, but maybe my mom's story touches people. And for sure, moms in general, I think they deserve the highest regard and the wow factor of anything. They deserve the most love, both physically, emotionally, mentally. I'm so thankful for my mom that she has really instilled that for me. It's been such an I learned the hard way, I think. And I hope for the future that sons and daughters, and really sons in general, are able to push that happiness, I think, for their mom. And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so I want you to take 30 seconds and just send your mom a message as if you're talking to her.
I would say, really thank God for you, and also thank God for my grandmother, who raised, I think, another queen, that was able to raise 2 sons in this way, to be hopefully so caring, that I can respect my ex-wife as the mother of my kids, I think. And there's a saying in Farsi that says, you shuma ke mara yad mikonin, ba yad Khuda bashin. That means, you know, basically, when you think of me, may you be in the thoughts of God. And that's all I want. So I think that's it.
Again, thank you so much, Yusuf. And I completely I can't say in words how grateful Susan and I are for you coming onto the show and telling us your story. And these are the stories that shape our future. These are the stories that shape our children and our family. And that's what we're hoping for, that your mother's story inspires people to actually look within their own lives and see what they need to change and what they can aspire to and be hopeful for. And because in the beginning of the podcast, I completely Americanized your last name because I do that with my own name.
That's
I'm
okay.
going to say Yusuf Faryad.
Uh-huh.
And thank you so much for coming on behalf of everyone at the American Muslim Institution, which this podcast is a project of. I want to thank you again so much on behalf of Rabbi Susan. Nothing but blessings, happiness, and lots and lots of care
Oh,
our way to
thank
you
you.
and your family. And again, hope to see you soon and learn more about great things that your mother is doing. Tell her to keep
Thank
rocking
you.
it and that she has
Of
a lot of
course.
people on her side.
Of course, I will relay exactly that. Thank you two ladies very much for this opportunity, for sure.
Thank you so much. We'll see you later.
Yes, you will. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.